All right, guys. Today we'll be talking about client requirements, client needs, and software requirements. So, how do you go about this? Getting your client need and the requirement for your software, right? It's a very simple task. We'll see how well we can do here. So, number one, okay, meet Bilky and meet Ben. Ben is a software engineer, and he's also a software product manager. Ben wants to develop a software for a client, and he's scared. Ben wants to meet the client, but he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to start, what to do, how to get the requirement, and what he wants. So meet Bilky. Bilky is used to this, and so Bilky is coming to tell him what to do. So let's see what Bilky will tell Ben, right? So requirement. So requirement is a specific description of your client needs. So the client need is what he wants his software to do, and what he wants, the features he wants, and everything about it. So the description of need and success. That's just a summary definition of what requirement. A description of need and the description of the success of of providing the need. Now remember, the software must be the right product, it must be done right, and must be managed right. Remember, Bilky has that in the back of her mind. So before Bilky goes on, she will want to tell Ben what to do to get the right client requirement for his software product. So the first thing is Bilky have to tell him about the activities he needs to do um, when, as in the process. So number one, he has to elicit all the requirements. So eliciting is very important. What is that? This is an interactive and investigative word process. So when Ben gets to his client, he needs to tell the client, he'll need to ask the client every necessary question that can clear what he's producing. So what the software will look like, what features it should have, the budget, the time base, and everything. Mind you, a want has core value, but it's not necessary. So whatever the client wants is different from what the software will need. So the client may want the software to do this or that. But what does the software need for it to function properly? So Bilky goes on and say a need, on the other hand, is a core functionality that the product must have in order to fulfill the product's purpose. Remember, the client wants this, but the want is good. But we want to focus our attention on the need. What is needed, what particular thing is needed. Mind you, every description within the client need has to be smart. So you have to be specific, it has to be measurable, it has to be attainable, it has to be realistic and time bound. So we want a smart connotation to measure this. And mind you, Ben has to ask every dumb questions there are. He needs to break every ambiguity. He doesn't need to assume. He won't assume that the client means this or that. He has to ask questions and break down every ambiguity. Everything must be clear on table. Great questions start with what and how. So Ben will want to ask questions that begins with what. What features do you want? What is the budget? All those things are very important. And also how. How do you want it to function? How do you want the functionality to go? So Becky, Belky goes ahead to tell Ben about the goals and the expectation based on questions. So number one question is what are the goals? What are the expectations? What are the core functionality of the product? What is your budget? What is the timeline for the product or the project? How do we communicate? Do we do it monthly? Do we do it weekly? How frequent will you want progress report? That means when I produce something, a prototype, can I show you after 3 weeks, after 4 weeks, after one day? Who are the target audience? features to be implemented, registration requirement within the region. All these questions must be asked and cleared, and much more, which Ben has to prepare himself before he meets the client. So Bilky, going on, telling Ben about the eliciting requirement, however, engages in in-depth discussion and collaboration from the start of the product development. So both the client and the development team work together to build a successful product. So that is what the elicitation means. So every information must be gathered and dropped. The goal of the requirement elicitation is to exhaustively identify the assumptions, the risk, and the needs involved in the project. So it involves brainstorming, research, analyzing, observation, prototyping, and surveys. So Ben has a lot of work to do. So requirement elicitation has several key benefits. Number one, establishes the precise scope of work and the budgets. That means we can provide the client with a realistic budget and release dates. So the client will know, okay, by this time, I should have this part of the product or the other part of the product. It avoids confusion during development. That's one key point. So if ambiguity is clear, everything will be let go. So adds business value. To develop a product that will facilitate a customer business activity, it's important to discuss both what should be done by the development team and why it should be done like that. It reveals hidden and assumed requirements. It also allows for developing only relevant functionality. So you don't go ahead and be developing things that are not relevant for the project at the very beginning. Once the decision is done, a business analyst goes through the requirements to make sure that each of these questions is answered for each requirement. So why? Why should the requirement be implemented? What problem does it solve? And what benefit does it provide? What? What is the exact meaning of the requirement? What are the business rules? And what are the compliances of the requirement? How? What are the possible ways to implement the requirement? And what are the possible obstacles? When? How urgent is the requirement? And how should I prioritize them? So this is very important. So expressing requirement is the next subject which Ben has to figure out. So the first one, eliciting. So that is usually done by a piece of paper. So Bilky, Ben should have a piece of paper which he will elicit and write every point he gathers from the client. So after it's done, the next one is expressing the requirement. How does he express it? Expressing requirement involves framing the requirement to allow a product to be built. So often requirements are first described through note, that's during the decision from meeting with the client, right? So this is a very powerful step for Ben. So Ben has to know how to listen and he has to know how to express them. So typically, representation includes use cases like user story or storyboard, among others. These are often tailored to projects. They could be simple or complex, textual or visual, right? So when we get to Jira implementation, you get to see the backboard and how you can implement user story. The next thing Ben has to focus on is prioritizing what his requirement. Question to help establish priorities include number one, what requirements should be done or should be completed. So you want to prioritize all the requirements. So after getting all the requirements, you elicit them. The next thing is what to express them. So once you've mapped out the requirement, you will actually know which requirement is actually crucial from the other, right? For the project and the product to be successful, you want to understand which of the feature should be implemented before another. What requirements should be done? In other words, what is important but is not as time critical or could be satisfied another way. So you have to understand one, what must be done first, what should be done next, what could be done next, and what will be done. So all these are four different prioritizing questions. What must be done, what should be done, what could be done, and what will be done. All these questions help you to prioritize your your project or the client statement. So how do we get this prioritizing? So priority using the Moscow principle. That's it. So the M stands for must, the S there stands for should, the C stands for could, and W there stands for would. Right? So must have is a feature that must be done. Should have is a feature that should be done. Could have is a feature that could be done. And would have is a feature that would be done. So the must have is a key feature that must be done now, and should have is a feature that will be done if there is time. Could have is a feature that will be done maybe later, maybe in the version 2 or the rest, right? So these are ways you prioritize your statement by asking the questions suggested here. All right, after prioritizing, we've seen eliciting, we've seen expressing, we've seen prioritizing. So we will analyze the requirement. So Ben has to analyze the requirement, the process of examining the listed requirement. You want to examine it for a project to ensure that they are clear, complete, right, and consistent, and consistency is known as analyzing what requirements. So all these three, they are clear, they are complete, they are consistent. They are all known as analyzing what requirement. Analyzing requirement helps to solve any potential conflicting problem or requirement, or identify problems that cannot be seen on the first glance. Right. So when you come, you won't see what's the problem, what's happening. So when you analyze the requirement, you will actually say, okay, this has a problem. We need to break this down into tasks, further tasks, like that. So we've done four. The first one is eliciting. The second one is expressing. The third one is prioritizing. The fourth one is analyzing. So the last one is managing requirements. So Bilky goes on to tell Ben how to manage his requirements. It involves the organizing and reorganizing of requirements, and possibly reusing subsets of requirements in different stages. It also involves keeping track of priorities, analyzing, and changing requirements if needed. So, if something changes in one requirement, it will affect other requirements and the development of the product. Managing requirement also means ensuring that the identified requirements are central to the many process of product creation, including coding, including testing, and change of logs. So these are some of the steps that will help Ben to understand his client statement and organize it properly and make sure it's going on fine. The next class will be talking about the types of requirements, which involves one, business requirements, two, business rules, three, users requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, external interfaces, physical product setting, development constraint. All these are factors, all these are types of requirements. If you think there are other type of requirements or ways for you to get questions or ways for you to get statements from your client, you can write it down below. Thank you. Next class, we'll be meeting next week. Thank you very much.